The slap echoed across the small roadside diner like a gunshot. For a moment, everything stopped. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Coffee cups hovered in the air. The old jukebox humming softly in the corner suddenly seemed far too quiet. An 81-year-old man sat alone at a corner booth, his thin hands resting beside a half-eaten plate of eggs and toast. His gray hair trembled slightly as his head tilted from the impact. A red mark slowly spread across his wrinkled cheek where the thug's hand had struck him. The old man didn't fight back. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply blinked, as if the world had suddenly grown heavier than he remembered. The thug standing over him laughed, loud and ugly, his leather jacket creaking as he leaned closer. The diner smelled of grease, coffee, and fear. No one moved. No one spoke. Because the man who had just slapped the old veteran wasn't just some random bully. He was known around town. And everyone knew better than to get involved. But none of them knew something else. Something that was about to change everything. Before the story continues, take a moment to support the channel. If you believe kindness still matters in this world, and that people deserve second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes the same, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts. The old man's name was Walter Briggs. Most people in the diner had seen him before. He came in almost every morning around 6:30 a.m., always wearing the same worn brown jacket and the same small American flag pin on the collar. He ordered the same breakfast every time, 2 eggs, toast, and black coffee. He never caused trouble. He never spoke loudly. But if someone looked closely, they might notice the way his hands trembled when he lifted his coffee cup. Or the faded military tattoo on his forearm that had blurred over decades of time. Walter Briggs had served in Vietnam. He had carried wounded soldiers through jungles under gunfire. He had seen things most people would never understand. But none of those battles had prepared him for growing old alone. Across the diner, the man who had slapped him was named Rick Donnelly. Rick wasn't much older than 40, but his reputation had spread like a dark cloud through the small town. He ran a small crew of troublemakers who dealt in intimidation, petty crime, and the kind of threats that made people lower their voices when speaking his name. And today, Rick was drunk. He had stumbled into the diner 30 minutes earlier, already angry at the world. The waitress had tried to keep her distance. The customers had kept their heads down. But Rick noticed Walter sitting there quietly with his veteran's cap resting on the table. And something about that peaceful old man irritated him. Maybe it was the dignity. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was simply because bullies look for the weakest person in the room. Rick had walked over slowly, his boots heavy on the diner floor. He stared down at the cap with the faded words, "Vietnam veteran," stitched across the front. Then he laughed. A cold, mocking laugh. Without warning, his hand shot out and smacked Walter across the face. The sound filled the diner like thunder. Now Rick stood there grinning, waiting for a reaction. Walter slowly straightened his head. His cheek burned, but he didn't show anger. Instead, his tired eyes simply looked up at Rick. And something about that calmness made Rick even angrier. He grabbed the old man's collar slightly, shaking him. People watched from their booths, hearts pounding. The waitress behind the counter looked like she might cry. But no one dared step forward. Until the front door of the diner opened. At first, it was just the sound of the bell above the door. A soft little chime. Then came the sound that followed. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. The deep, thunderous rumble of powerful engines rolled across the parking lot like an approaching storm. Everyone inside the diner turned their heads toward the windows. Outside, one motorcycle pulled in. Then another. And another. Chrome glinted in the rising morning sun. Heavy bikes lined the parking lot, their engines growling before slowly shutting off one by one. Leather jackets. Black boots. Patches. A long line of bikers dismounted their motorcycles. The name stitched across their backs was unmistakable. Hell's Angels. Inside the diner, Rick's confident smirk faded slightly. The front door opened again. The bell chimed once more. A tall man stepped inside. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with a thick gray beard and a leather vest covered in patches. His presence filled the doorway like a shadow. The room fell silent. His eyes scanned the diner calmly. Then they landed on Walter. And everything changed. The big biker froze. For a moment, the hardened man looked like a small boy who had just seen someone he loved after many years. Because the old man sitting in that booth wasn't just some stranger. He was his father. Walter Briggs had a son named Daniel. But most people didn't know that anymore. Daniel Briggs had left home when he was barely 18, angry at the world, angry at life, angry at everything he couldn't understand. He had drifted across the country, eventually finding himself among bikers, road trips, and rough crowds. Over time, he became something more. A leader. A man people respected and feared. But despite all the years and all the miles, he had never stopped loving his father. Daniel stepped forward slowly. Behind him, more bikers quietly entered the diner. Not aggressively, not loudly, just present. Their heavy boots thudded softly against the floor. Rick slowly let go of Walter's collar. His eyes darted between the bikers. Daniel approached the booth. Walter looked up. For a moment, father and son simply stared at each other. Years of distance hung silently between them. Walter's eyes softened. Daniel noticed the red mark on his father's cheek. Something dark flickered behind his calm expression. The room seemed to shrink. Rick tried to laugh it off. But the sound came out weak. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply placed one large hand gently on his father's shoulder. Then he turned his gaze toward Rick. And in that moment, Rick realized something terrifying. This wasn't about bikers. This wasn't about intimidation. This was about family. Walter slowly lifted his hand and rested it over Daniel's. A silent gesture. A quiet request. Walter had fought in real wars. He didn't want another one starting in a diner. Daniel understood. He took a slow breath. Then he looked back at Rick. And instead of violence, he did something no one expected. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from his father. The tension in the room shifted. Daniel calmly ordered coffee from the stunned waitress. Rick stood there awkwardly, unsure what to do. The dozens of bikers around the diner weren't yelling. They weren't threatening. They were simply watching. And suddenly, Rick looked very small. Daniel finally spoke, not loudly, but firmly enough that everyone could hear. He explained that Walter Briggs had saved lives in a jungle thousands of miles away. He explained that men like Walter had carried wounded soldiers through gunfire so others could live normal lives. He explained that respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you showed. The words landed heavier than fists ever could. Rick's face flushed. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed. The entire diner waited. Rick slowly stepped back. Then something surprising happened. He looked at Walter. And he mumbled an apology. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't noble. But it was real. Walter nodded once. And just like that, the storm passed. Breakfast resumed. Coffee cups clinked again. The world started moving. But something had changed inside that diner. Daniel stayed and ate breakfast with his father. 2 generations sitting quietly together. Years of silence slowly melting away between bites of toast and sips of coffee. Outside, the motorcycles waited in the sun. But inside, something far more powerful had happened. A bully had been humbled. A father had been protected. And a son had come home. Before we reach the ending, here's a special request for you. Comment the word, respect, if you believe people who served their country deserve honor and kindness. Because stories like Walter's remind us of something important. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is choose peace. As Daniel and Walter walked out of the diner together that morning, the town saw something unforgettable. A long line of bikers stood beside their motorcycles. And every single one of them removed their helmets. Silently, respectfully, for an 81-year-old veteran who had once carried others through war. And still carried dignity through life. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in respect and compassion, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Because sometimes the quietest heroes are the ones the world needs to remember most.